The morning mists clung to the battlements of Casterly Rock like pale ghosts, parting only reluctantly as the first pale shafts of dawn crept over the sea. In the embrace of those ancient stones, Tyrion Lannister stood at the summit, his small frame swathed in a gown of crimson velvet, shot through with threads of gold. The world lay before him. Endless waves dancing under the rising sun, the golden fields of the Westerlands stretching southward, and farther still, the vast reaches of the Seven Kingdoms, all poised on the brink of his newly kindled ambition. Born amid the splendor reserved for heirs, Tyrion had never known the scorn of his childhood peers. From his first breath, his path was determined. He would one day govern Casterly Rock and hold dominion over the Lion's Lands. Varys had whispered it in the king's ear. Lady Joanna's gentle embrace had sealed it at his cradle. Even the howling sea winds seemed to concede to his claim, carrying distant echoes of his triumph into the heart of Lannisport below. By the time he was 10, Tyrion's tutors had declared him gifted, fluent in both the High Valyrian of old lore and the common tongue, adept in mathematics, history, and the martial tactics that shaped the great battles of yore. Sir Kevan, his uncle and now his sworn sword, had grown accustomed to his nephew's sharp mind. For Tyrion's questions were endless. Why did Aegon choose the bitter steel over the gold road? He would ask, and Sir Kevan would answer, only to see the boy's brow furrow and his tongue seek yet another knot to unravel. Lady Joanna had watched with a mother's pride as her son mastered the blade that, in his hands, seemed almost too large, unseen by the world. She wept tears of joy and sorrow. Younger by mere years than her husband, she had known what it meant to lose a son. Yet in Tyrion's eager gaze she believed she saw always the promise of victory over the cruel whims of fate. By the time Tyrion reached his 16th summer, the realm itself had come to regard the boy-turned-heir with a mixture of awe and cautious optimism. In King's Landing, the court buzzed with rumors. The dwarf who would be Lord of Casterly Rock, the tutor-schooled prodigy, the young lion whose stature belied the ferocity of his intellect. His father, Lord Tywin, received such whispers with a cold, calculated smile. Approval, by the rarest of standards. But Tyrion felt little of the brutal disdain that had marked his life in another world. Here, at Casterly Rock, he was no outcast. He was the Golden Son. And yet, for all the privilege, the hearths of Casterly Rock knew a quiet melancholy. Tyrion's mother fell ill the winter before his 17th name day, the chill winds of the mountains sapping the strength from her brilliant mind. In the amber glow of a single torch, he sat by her side, recounting the histories he had learned, weaving dreams of prosperity for their lands. She clutched his hand and smiled, though it hurt her. "My Tyrion," she whispered. "The lion's roar is in your blood, but never forget the kindness of the Dew's heart." When Lady Joanna passed, the castle mourned as if its stones had bled. Yet for Tyrion, her final words became a lantern in the corridors of his youth, guiding him beyond grief. He devoted himself to rule, walking walls and halls, mastering the ledger and map alike, seeking always to temper his father's iron will with compassion. On his 18th name day, a feast was held in the Grand Hall, lit by 1,000 torches whose flickering light danced upon the banners of House Lannister. Lords and ladies of the Westerlands, merchants from Lannisport, and even envoys from the Reach and the Vale came to celebrate. When Tyrion rose to speak, his voice carried with the confidence of one who knew his destiny. He pledged to uphold his house's honor, to protect the small folk whose toil fed the golden coffers, and to ensure that Casterly Rock's lion-hearted rule would be remembered for justice, as well as strength. Across the seas, the war drums of slavers on Slaver's Bay sounded faintly, and whispers of unrest in Dorne drifted northward. In the capital, whispers of his potential betrothal to a daughter of House Tyrell tickled the ear of courtly gossipers. But Tyrion, ever pragmatic, weighed the alliances of marriage against the autonomy of his birthright. He saw in his future not merely the consolidation of power, but the forging of a realm strong enough to weather any storm. When word came that his father would attend the small council at King's Landing, Tyrion accompanied Tywin on the Red Wine Road, the the Lion's Gate of Casterly Rock receding behind them, like a vanished dream. For the first time, he would stand among the realm's greatest, not as a reluctant envoy, but as the heir to Casterly Rock. In the wagon that carried him, Tyrion studied the sun-dappled vineyards and rolling hills, each mile bringing him closer to the crucible of politics and peril. He was no longer the boy taught in towers and halls. He was the lord-in-waiting, a player in the grand game. His green eyes, sharp with the hunger of ambition and tempered by grace, stared out at the realm he would one day govern. Thus began the turning of a new age for Tyrion Lannister, where a son seldom welcome would instead shape the destiny of Westeros, and where the golden lion of Casterly Rock would roar before the realm, a promise to friend and foe alike that the small man could cast a vast shadow, and that wisdom could indeed be born in the crucible of privilege and pain alike. Tyrion left the carriage at the gates of King's Landing under a sky streaked with the pastel hues of dusk. Torches flared as he and his father passed beneath the Lion's Gate. The sound of the city a clamorous welcome, the shout of sailors, the clatter of carts over cobblestones, the distant clang of armor. Here, in the heart of the Seven Kingdoms, the game was played not with swords, but with words and promises and secrets whispered behind closed doors. In the Red Keep, he was shown to his quarters, modest chambers near the small council chamber, lined with tapestries depicting the wars of old. Tyrion paused before one. Aegon's conquest, dragons breathing fire upon the veil, the shattered shields of Lord Rolf. His tutor would have delighted in the accuracy. His father, perhaps, only in the warning. That evening, over a quiet supper of spiced fowl and arbor gold, Tywin Lannister outlined the purpose of their journey. The hand seeks my counsel on the Dornish question. The Martells grow restless, and Myrcella's promised match bears more danger than reward. You will listen, learn, and speak when we dine with the Queen. Mentii. Tyrion nodded, tasting the wine's sweetness, letting its warmth fill him. In this hall of marble and gold, every glance carried meaning, every compliment concealed a dagger. Yet he felt no fear, only the steady pulse of excitement. On the morrow, they crossed into the throne room. The Iron Throne loomed above them, its jagged blades a testament to conquest and cruelty. Around it sat Sir Kevan, Lord Mace Tyrell, Lord Arryn's envoy, and Prince Doran's ambassador. At the Queen's right elbow, Cersei watched with eyes like polished garnets, and beside her, Myrcella sat silent, both daughter and pawn. Lord Tywin spoke first, his voice like gravel on steel. Tyrion observed how the others listened, how Lord Mace's smooth words sought to charm, how Lord Imry Martell measured each syllable. When it came Tyrion's turn, he rose, pausing so the hush could gather before him. "My lord hand your grace," he began, voice calm but firm. "The peace of the realm depends upon recognizing that the Martells remember the Red Viper's death as keenly as we remember Blackwater's scorch. They seek not only alliance but respect. To dismiss them risks inflaming a thirst for vengeance we cannot assuage with mere marriage." A murmur rippled. Cersei's lips twisted. Approval? Disdain? Impossible to say. Tywin inclined his head once, and Lord Mace leaned forward as though to catch every word. Tyrion pressed on, outlining terms that would grant Dornish lords a formal voice at council meetings, a share of the southern coastal tolls, and the right to maintain their own legal traditions. At the end, there was an uncomfortable pause. Then, as if snapped from a spell, Lord Mace cleared his throat. "A generous proposal, Lord Tyrion, but one that lightly treats the precedent of the Iron Throne's sovereignty." Tyrion met him coolly. "Generosity, my lord, is the surest foundation of loyalty." Lord Tywin's gaze sharpened, and the hand inclined his head. "I believe your nephew's counsel merits serious consideration." Thus it was set. Terms drafted and sent south. Envoys dispatched with seal and signature. Tyrion's heart thumped. His words would shape policy. His ideas bridge centuries of enmity. As the days passed in the capital, he was drawn ever deeper into court life. The clandestine meetings in the gardens beneath the moon, the secret signs exchanged by merchants and spies, the hushed negotiations in narrow corridors. Each encounter honed his skill. To ask the right question, to offer just enough praise, to disguise ambition behind a smile. Yet even as he thrived, news came that chilled his blood. In the Stormlands, Lord Stannis Baratheon had taken Dragonfire. Whispers said the beast of Daenerys Targaryen had imperiled his host. The council trembled at the thought of Targaryen power returning. Casterly Rock's claim to Lannisport's prosperity might be challenged by refugees fleeing across the narrow sea. Tyrion rode that night to survey the city walls, torchlight glinting on his traveling cloak. Below, the boulevards of Lannisport lay quiet. He imagined families packing, merchants fleeing, the docks choked with hulls. He thought of the mines beneath Casterly Rock, of the gold that funded Lannister rule, and of the mothers and fathers who toiled in the dark seams to fill those coffers. He returned to his chambers and wrote to Sir Kevan. Reinforce Lannisport's defenses, secure the eastern gate, and patrol the Golden Road. At dawn, a rider bore the missive westward. That same morning, Tyrion presented to his father a plan to forge an alliance with House Frey, to grant them rights along the other bank of the Green Fork, in exchange for levies and a fleet of river galleys. It was audacious, dangerous, yet Tywin approved. "You learn well," he acknowledged. Emboldened, Tyrion turned his thoughts to his own domain. He penned letters to every lord of the Westerlands, offering trade concessions and guarantees of mine safety, inviting them to a grand tourney at Casterly Rock the following spring. He wrote to Cersei, suggesting a display of Lannister pageantry in the king's name, a gesture that would both flaunt their riches and remind the realm of their strength. But even as he moved pieces on this immense board, Tyrion did not neglect the small folk. Late one evening, disguised in a traveler's cloak, he slipped from the Red Keep and wandered the alleys of Flea Bottom. He saw children huddled over scraps of bread, families nursing fever, a beggar woman stooped with arthritis. With a pouch of coins, he visited the chantry of the mother, arranging for extra wheat to be delivered to the poorest quarter each week, and dispatching Septa Muriel to oversee the distribution. By the time he returned to his quarters, the first light of dawn was washing the sky. He was tired, but exhilarated. He tasted in that weariness a new power, the power to change lives beyond grand statutes and proclamations. The next council session found him armed with proposals both grand and modest: increased patrols on the Gold Road to curb banditry, a collegiate grant for young maesters from the Westerlands, and a loan program for small merchants in Sweetport Sound. The hand of the small council quaked as they considered the scale of his ambition. In quieter moments, Tyrion found solace in the library, losing himself in treatises on governance and the annals of Valyrian rule. There he met Lady Sansa Stark, sent from the north to be fostered at King's Landing under Cersei's watchful eye. She was cautious, wary, yet when he confided his hope that the north might one day trade wool for Lannisport steel, her eyes brightened. Together they pored over maps and trade ledgers, forging a friendship born of shared intellect and ambition. As spring crept northward, the pines of the north wind carried the scent of thawing snow and fresh pine shoots. Tywin summoned Tyrion to return to Casterly Rock to oversee preparations for the tourney. It was, thought Tyrion, the culmination of all he had labored for, a demonstration of Lannister magnificence and a statement that the Westerlands stood united under its air. They rode together, Tywin silent beside him, the Lion's Gate looming as they approached. Casterly Rock rose above the sea like a sentinel of gold and stone. When they dismounted, the banners fluttered in the breeze, and the men-at-arms, knights of the Westerlands, lined the courtyard in crimson and gold. As he walked through his ancestral hall, he felt again the words of his mother echoing in his heart. Lions roar, but does heart. He understood now that ruling required both the iron fist and the gentle touch, that a lord must inspire awe and compassion in equal measure. In the months that followed, Casterly Rock's grandest tourney drew knights from every corner of the realm. The lists rang with the thunder of hooves, the clang of steel. In the shadow of the great fortress, ambassadors negotiated marriages, traders negotiated contracts, and the common folk cheered beneath the banners. Tyrion moved among them, greeting lords and ladies, hearing grievances and hopes, dispensing favors and forging bonds. He greeted Lord Tarly with a warm hand on his shoulder, presented Lady Serwyn with a gift of Lannister steel, and even toasted a drunken hedge knight, whose lance had shattered the best of the Vale's champion. At the feast, as the sun dipped low, he stood at the high table beside his father, beside Sansa Stark and Marjorie Tyrell, Cersei beside them with a slow, careful smile. The minstrels struck up a tune, and the hall filled with song and laughter. Raising his goblet, Tyrion felt the weight of the world rest on his shoulders, and the thrill of possibility thrumming through his veins. Here, in the cradle of his birthright, he had carved a path. From the towers of the Red Keep back to these ancient walls, from counselor to ruler in waiting. Yet even in triumph, his mind wandered to the shadows beyond the feast. The murmurs of rebellion in Dorne, the flicker of dragons across the narrow sea, the threats that would test every ounce of Lannister resolve. He would meet them all, as lord, as strategist, as heir. And with each challenge, he would remember the lessons of his mother, the counsel of his tutors, and the roar of the lion that named him. And so, beneath the vaulted ceilings of Casterly Rock, the young Lord Tyrion Lannister stood at the threshold of legend, poised to lead, to learn, and to leave his mark upon a realm whose destiny he would shape with every choice, every word, every whisper of gold. Tyrion awoke before dawn, the first gray light filtering through the narrow window of his chamber. The memory of last night's triumph still warmed his bones. The crack of lances in the lists, the roar of banners along the walls, the taste of wine and fire in the feast hall. Yet as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he felt the familiar coil of restlessness in his chest. The joys of victory could not still the urgent questions that pressed upon him. What lay beyond the walls of Casterly Rock? What dangers surged in the distant corners of the realm? And most of all, what kind of lord would he become when his father's hand finally relinquished its grip? Rising quietly, he donned a simple gray cloak over his crimson tunic, fastening the brooch of House Lannister at his throat. He slipped from the chamber and crossed the silent hallway, descending the winding stair that led to the servants' corridor. There, he paused outside a plain wooden door and rapped softly. The door opened to reveal Septa Muriel, her kindly face drawn with concern. "My lord?" she whispered, stepping aside. "I wish to walk the rock before the others awoke," Tyrion said, offering her a gentle smile. "May I trouble you for a lantern?" She handed him a brass lantern, its wick already alight. "Be careful on the stairs, my lord." "I always am," he replied, though the truth was that he moved through shadows more often than not. He nodded and continued on, the lantern's glow dancing against the uneven stone walls. The corridors of Casterly Rock were vast and labyrinthine, stretching deep into the mountain like veins of granite. Tyrion navigated them with ease, his small stature allowing him to slip past locked doors and guards posts with minimal notice. He emerged onto a spiral stair that led further downward, the air cooling as he descended. Soon he stood at the entrance to the lower galleries, where the servants' quarters gave way to storage rooms and ancient armories. Here, the hush felt thicker, as though the mountain itself were holding its breath. He passed racks of pikes and halberds, their shafts wrapped in oilcloth to prevent rust. He passed crates of salted fish, barrels of wine, and sacks of grain, supplies to see Casterly Rock through any siege. His lantern revealed scrawled notations on the walls, tally marks recording the stockpiles, initials of quartermasters long dead, crude sketches of storehouses and secret passages. The secret passages called to him most, hidden doorways leading to tunnels that opened far from the rock, beneath cliffs or behind waterfalls. His imagination filled them with possibilities. Swift escapes for the royal family in times of war, covert ingress for spies in times of peace. He found the door concealed behind a tapestry depicting Lan the Clever's cunning trick on Casterly the Proud. A carved panel slid aside at a pressure point, revealing a narrow corridor he had never explored. He let curiosity guide him, venturing deeper until the walls closed in low overhead, the only sound his boots echoing against the stone. The corridor twisted, turned, and finally opened into a cave-like chamber where water dripped from the ceiling. pooling in shallow basins. Beyond it lay a tunnel sloping upward, faint light glimmering at its end. Tyrion crouched through the opening and emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking the western coast. Below him, the waves slapped against sheer cliffs, white foam pulsing like a heartbeat against dark rock. In the distance, the sea stretched to the horizon, where a lone gull wheeled above a distant reef. The wind carried the salt tang of the ocean and the mournful cry of seabirds. Here, far from the bustle of lords and ladies, Tyrion felt both small and infinite, as though he stood on the edge of the world. He leaned his lantern against the wall and sat, drawing his knees close to his chest. For a long time, he simply watched the sea, thinking of all the places he had yet to see. The marble spires of Old Town, the red sands of Dorne, the frozen wastes beyond the wall, and the foreign cities across the narrow sea where dragons still flew. He felt the tug of destiny, as though the currents of fate carried him outward toward adventures he could scarcely imagine. Footsteps on the ledge above startled him, and he scrambled upright. Sir Kevin's broad form appeared in the tunnel's mouth, torch in hand. The captain of the guard's keen eyes widened in surprise. "My lord," he said, voice low, "you should not be here." Tyrion offered a rueful shrug. "I sought the dawn without ceremony." Sir Kevin set down his torch and regarded his nephew thoughtfully. "Until the sun crests the rock, few know of this passage. It is seldom used, and only by those in dire need. And dire need seems to be my constant companion these days," Tyrion replied, stepping out onto the ledge. "But you know me. I prefer the company of the sea to the whispers of courtiers." Kevin nodded, turning to look at the horizon. "You learn much in silence, Tyrion. I have never understood your father's scorn for our gifts. You move among men like a fish in water." "Now," Tyrion let the faintest smile cross his lips. "A fish that prefers wine and words to nets and scales." "Nor do you lack courage," Kevin said, handing him the torch. "But remember, the world is not as kind as these stones. Beyond these walls, every speaker wields words as weapons more deadly than any blade. You must arm yourself with more than wit to survive." Tyrion accepted the torch and gazed at the tunnel behind him. "I intend to learn every secret weapon I can. And in time, I will forge them into tools of our house strength." "Then?" "No." Kevin's gaze was grave. "Then do not forget your duty to the small folk of these lands. They are the backbone of our wealth and power. A lord who loses their loyalty loses the very foundation of his house." Tyrion's green eyes grew distant as he considered those words. "I will not fail them." With a gentle palming of the younger man's shoulder, Sir Kevin led the way back through the passage. Tyrion followed, torch held aloft, his mind alive with plans and possibilities. When they emerged into the lower galleries, the last embers of dawn glowed faintly overhead, and servants were already stirring, hauling crates, sweeping floors, preparing for the day's labors. Tyrion paused to observe their toil, wondering how many had forgotten the fate they might have suffered had the tides of war turned against House Lannister. A servant girl scurried past, nearly tripping over a bucket. Tyrion called after her, and she froze, eyes wide. He set down the torch and retrieved a gold coin from his pouch, dropping it into the bucket she held. "For your work," he said with a smile. Her face lit at the shimmering coin. "My lord." "Call me Tyrion," he said, turning away to follow Kevin down the corridor. The girl's gasp reminded him of the gulf that still separated him from the people who labored in his name. He vowed to narrow that distance whenever he could. By the time they reached the courtyard, the castle was alive with sound: clatter of horses' hooves, clang of armor, the calls of stable hands. Tyrion paused to relight his lantern's wick, and Sir Kevin offered him a steed, an elegantly caparisoned destrier of golden chestnut. Tyrion mounted, settled the cloak around his shoulders, and drew the reins. "Where to, my lord?" Kevin asked, falling in beside him. "First to the mines," Tyrion replied. "Then to the docks in Lannisport. I have plans to visit every corner of our domain." Kevin inclined his head. "As you wish. But know that the deeper you go into the mines, the heavier the burdens you will find. Do not mistake wealth for happiness." Their column threaded through the gatehouse, past guards saluting and peasants bowing their heads. Beyond the outer walls lay the broad expanse of Casterly Rock's lands, the vineyards on gentle slopes, the wheat fields golden in the morning sun, and the dark mouth of the mines carved into the hill below. A steady plume of smoke rose from the smelters, where Lannister iron was forged and gold was purified. As they approached the mine entrance, miners paused in their labors to watch the heir's procession. Tyrion dismounted and walked among them, boots of polished leather crunching on gravel. He inspected their helmets, their lanterns, and the simple tools they wielded. He knelt beside a man hauling a cart of ore, wiping the sweat from the man's brow. "Hard work," he murmured. The miner nodded, breathing heavily. "But we feed the forge, my lord. Without us, there is no might to house Lannister." "You speak true," Tyrion replied, rising. "And I intend to make sure your toil is not in vain." He spent the morning in the dim tunnels behind the iron doors, watching the men drill and hammer, listening to the echoes of rock struck by steel. He asked questions. How many men worked each shift? How often did cave-ins occur? What could be done to improve ventilation and safety? He took notes on a scrap of parchment, his handwriting neat and precise, and promised to send funds for better equipment. When he emerged, blinking in the sunlight, his cloak and gloves were streaked with dust. He greeted a young officer of the guard and ordered shipments of food and ale for the weary miners, along with extra wages for supervisors who watched over safety measures. The officer blinked in surprise. No lord had ever asked after the miners before. Tyrion chuckled as they prepared the orders. Let the crowns reach those who earned them. They remounted and rode toward Lannisport, the city's walls rising in tiled tiers above the harbor. Ships rocked gently at their moorings, sails furled, seagulls wheeling overhead. Merchants shouted from cart stalls along the docks, hawking fish, spices, cloth, and fine wines. The air was rich with the scent of salt and commerce. Tyrion spent the afternoon among merchants and shipwrights, negotiating lower tolls for traders from across the narrow sea, arranging for faster ships to carry Lannisport's goods, and commissioning a fleet of light vessels to patrol piracy routes. He walked the marketplaces, buying oranges for children, sampling fresh bread, and listening to gossip of distant lands. He heard of a merchant from Korth seeking a new trading post in the Westerlands, of a slaver's galley wrecked on the stepstones, and of rumors that Daenerys Targaryen's dragons might be spotted as far west as the Summer Isles. As dusk approached, he returned to his chambers at Casterly Rock, hands full of ledgers, contracts, and letters from grateful merchants. He set them on his writing desk and poured himself a cup of arbor gold, the wine golden as the fields he governed. He spread the parchment before him and began to write instructions to invest in mine safety, to build granaries in the poorest villages, and to dispatch envoys to Korth with gifts and trade proposals. His quill scratched across the paper until the candle burned low, and the far-off hoot of an owl echoed in the tower. Only when the last letter was sealed and addressed did he lean back, closing his eyes with satisfaction. In every corner of his domain he had made progress. The mines would be safer, the merchants enriched, the small folk cared for. And in doing so, he had strengthened the bonds that held House Lannister's power in place. Yet, even in this moment of triumph, thoughts of the wider world crept in. He thought of his father in King's Landing, battling the whispers of his enemies, of Sansa in the Red Keep, caught between honor and ambition, and of the distant drums in the east that heralded wars yet to come. The realm was shifting on its foundations, and he, Tyrion of Casterly Rock, stood poised at the nexus of that change. He snuffed the candle and rose, tugging the cloak around his shoulders. In silence, he walked to the balcony overlooking the western sea, lantern in hand. The moon cast a silver path across the dark waters, leading his gaze to the horizon and beyond. He imagined the ships that would sail those waters, carrying traders, knights, and perhaps ambassadors of alien tongues. He imagined armies marching eastward, flames on the shorelines, and the roar of dragons. The world was vast, dangerous, and full of promise. Tyrion inhaled deeply, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs. He remembered his mother's words. The lions roar and the Dew's heart. He vowed to carry both within himself, ruling not only with strength but with kindness, not only with strategy but with compassion. His journey was only beginning. The stones of Casterly Rock would echo his name for centuries to come, or they would crumble under the weight of his failures. He turned away from the sea and descended the stair one final time. The echo of his boots, a steady heartbeat in the silent tower. Tomorrow, he would rise before dawn once more and walk the lands of his birthright, shaping them in the image of his vision. And in that vision, he saw a Westerlands united, a small folk uplifted, and a House Lannister that stood not just as a powerhouse of gold, but as a beacon of justice and prosperity in a fractured realm. As he reached his chamber, the first golden light of morning crept across the floor. Tyrion paused at the threshold, lantern in hand, and smiled. The world awaited him, vast, perilous, and ripe with opportunity. He set the lantern down, extinguished its flame with a determined whisper, and stepped forward into the dawn. He rose with the sun, as he had every morning since the tourney's close, and made his way to the high tower where the archives were kept. The corridors, narrow and echoing, were lined with dusty tomes bound in leather and iron clasps. Tyrion paused before one heavy volume, the Chronicle of the Blackwater, its pages yellowed with age. He reverently opened it, tracing the account of his forebears' deeds, seeking wisdom in their victories and their failures. His studies were interrupted when a rap sounded on the door. He closed the chronicle and called, "Enter." Sir Kevin stepped through, a fold of parchment in hand. "A letter from King's Landing," he said, eyes grave. "My lord, it bears the royal seal." Tyrion's heart quickened. He broke the seal and unfolded the vellum. In precise script, his father requested his counsel on an urgent matter. Bandit uprisings along the King's Road, threatening supply lines to the north. Tywin offered no orders, only an invitation. "Come south and advise, or remain here to manage the Westerlands as he saw fit." He met Kevin's gaze. "I will ride for King's Landing," he said. "But first I must secure our borders here. Summon the captains of our watch, and have messages sent to the Freys and the Valerians. I intend a joint patrol next fortnight." He handed the letter back to Kevin. "Prepare my warhorse." Outside in the courtyard, the clamor of preparation was already in motion. Tyrion mounted a sleek black charger named Midnight, and Sir Kevin joined him on his own steed. Behind them, pages and knights formed ranks. As they set out, the rising sun cast long shadows across the fields, where peasants plowed and shepherds drove their flocks. The sight steeled him. This was his realm, its prosperity and safety resting upon the decisions he made. They rode for 2 days toward the Westerland's eastern border, through rolling hills dotted with timber villages and fortified watchtowers. At each garrison, Tyrion dismounted to speak with captains and sentries, listening to their concerns and issuing orders to improve patrols. Rotate guards more frequently, erect signal fires on hilltops, and build stone guardhouses at the crossroads. He met locals brought in with grain requisitions and listened to their tales of bandits wearing stolen crowns, men who claimed the Targaryens still ruled the land. On the second eve, under a canopy of stars, they camped near the crossroads of Ashford. By the campfire's glow, Tyrion convened a war council with Sir Kevin and the captains of houses Frey and Valerian. Maps were unfurled on a rough-hewn table, quills jotted notes, and cups of mulled wine passed around. He proposed a patrol schedule that would encircle the bandit-infested woods to the north, using light cavalry to flush out the outlaws and heavy infantry to trap them against the Green Fork. The Frey captain nodded approvingly. "Your plan is sound, my lord," he said. "With our levies and Lord Corley's ships patrolling the river, there will be nowhere for them to hide." Tyrion leaned forward, gaze intense in the firelight. "Then we must strike swiftly, before word of our alliance spreads. We take them at dawn." At last, the captains dispersed to ready their men. Tyrion returned to his tent, restless sleep eluding him until the first pale light of morning carried the sound of horns and the clank of armor. He emerged to see assembled forces, knights in gold and red sleeves, Frey banners fluttering beside Valerian pennons. He gave the signal, and drums rolled, horses neighed, and the column moved as one toward the forest's edge. The trees stood silent, sentinel as the Lannister forces entered, scouts fanning out along forest trails. Tyrion rode at the vanguard, the crisp air stinging his cheeks. His chest tightened with anticipation. When the signal came, a single horn from the west, the strike force charged. The forest erupted in chaos. Steel flashed, horses stumbled, and bandits shrieked. Tyrion spurred Midnight forward, cutting a path toward the outlaw leader, a hulking brute wearing the remnant of a red dragon banner. The outlaw raised a sword stained with rust and menace. Tyrion met him blade to blade, parrying a savage blow that would have clipped his head. He countered with a calculated thrust, driving the point between armor plates. The bandit staggered, surprise flooding his eyes before he crumpled. Around them, the forest fell silent as the remaining outlaws surrendered or fled. Tyrion stood in the clearing, chest heaving. Surrounded by the battered but victorious soldiers of the Westerlands, and the twins, and the narrow sea fleet. He sheathed his sword and raised a gauntleted hand. "Enough," he called. "Let them go to their masters. Bandits no more. They shall face justice in Lannisport." The captains saluted, and a dozen prisoners were bound and led away. Tyrion surveyed the aftermath. Broken arrows, discarded shields, the scattered remains of campfires. He felt a thrill of triumph. Not for the glory of battle, but for the safety restored to the roads his people traveled. That afternoon, he dispatched riders carrying news of the victory to Casterly Rock and King's Landing. He stayed to oversee the search for hidden stashes of stolen gold, then remounted to return eastward under a rising sun. 2 days later, he emerged from the Kingswood onto the broad plain beneath King's Landing's walls. Smoke curled from the Red Keep spires, and the city's bustle rose to meet him as he passed through the city gates. He rode at once to the small council chambers, where his father waited, seated at the head of a long table. Around him were Sir Barristan, Lord Varys, Lord Vance of Atranta, and other lords of the realm. "Welcome, my lord of the Westerlands," Tywin said without rising. He studied Tyrion with inscrutable eyes. "I hear you have dealt with the bandits." Tyrion nodded, removing his gloves. "They will trouble the King's Road no more." A murmur of approval passed around the table. Lord Vance leaned forward. "Your swift action is commendable. The grain caravans can move north again." Tyrion allowed himself a small smile. "That is good news. I am glad to serve." The hand motioned for graver matters. "Now, my son, we must discuss the unrest in Dorne and the rumored Targaryen threat across the sea." Tyrion sat and took up quill and parchment, ready to apply the same blend of strategy and compassion that had served his own lands. As he listened to reports and offered his counsel, he felt the threads of the Seven Kingdoms weaving together under his hand. By nightfall the council had adjourned, and Tyrion stood atop the Red Keep's battlements with his sister Cersei. Below, the city stretched like a tapestry, lanterns twinkling in the dark, boats gliding along the black water. "You have done well," Cersei said softly. "Perhaps father should step aside and let you rule in his stead." He smiled at her and looked out over the city. "One day," he replied. "But until then, I will carve my path with every choice I make." She studied him, pride and something unspoken flickering in her eyes. "Then let us both take care. Our enemies are many, and not all will be so easily enticed by promises." Tyrion inclined his head. "I know, but I have found that even the hardest heart can be moved by acts of mercy. And if that fails, well, I have my wit and my sword." She laughed, a clear ringing sound that drifted over the battlements. "Just remember, words can be knives sharper than steel." He nodded, the wind tugging at his cloak. "I will remember." Beneath the stars, atop the seat of power, Tyrion Lannister closed his eyes for a moment and breathed in the night air. Every dawn brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. He felt the weight of Casterly Rock and the Westerlands upon his shoulders, but also the strength of his vision, the promise of his mother's words, and the unwavering support of those who believed in him. In the heart of the realm, At the summit of power, the youngest heir of House Lannister prepared to shape the fate of the Seven Kingdoms, and beyond, to lands where dragons still roamed and destinies waited to be forged. And with each step he took, he would carry the roar of the lion and the kindness of the doe, a ruler crafted by both steel and grace. Tyrion awoke the following morning to a soft drizzle that misted the ramparts of the Red Keep. He dressed quickly in a dark green doublet edged with gold thread, the color of new growth and prosperity, qualities he intended to instill in the kingdoms he served. Over breakfast, his father's ravens arrived with their first dispatches from Dorne. Unrest in Sunspear had grown more vocal, and Prince Martell's envoys demanded a firmer guarantee of Dornish rights. Tywin frowned over his cup of black tea. "We cannot allow Dorne to slide into rebellion," he said, setting the cup down with a deliberate tap. "The realm cannot stand divided." Tyrion leaned forward, fingers drumming the table. "If I may, my lord, I believe the unrest stems not from malice, but from mistrust. They fear that promises made at King's Landing will vanish like desert mirages. We must show them good faith on Dornish soil." "Then Tywin's gaze sharpened. "And you propose what, exactly?" "An envoy led by myself to Sunspear," Tyrion said, "bearing not only letters sealed in gold, but tokens of our respect. Gifts of food for the hungry artisans to rebuild wells, and apprenticeships for Dornish youth in the mines of the Westerlands. Let them see that House Lannister does not send hollow words but pledges crafted in deeds." The hand considered the proposal as Tyrion watched the silver light dance on his father's crown. At last, Tywin inclined his head. "Very well. You leave at once. Take 200 men-at-arms for your escort, and travel via the Greenblood to show our mastery of every road." Tyrion rose, bowing. "I will not fail you, nor the realm." Within the hour, he was reviewing maps with Sir Kevan and Sir Giles of Highgarden, plotting a route that threaded through fertile valleys and across bridge-held passes. He chose the slow trade roads rather than the swift King's Road, preferring to meet local lords face to face. By midday, he departed the capital with half his escort, the other half to follow with the supplies and trade goods. They traveled south for a fortnight, passing through the Stormlands where burnt villages still bore scars of years past, and the Reach, where fields of grain rippled under the wind. At every keep, Tyrion dismounted to speak with farmers and hedge knights, offering relief packages for those still rebuilding after the Blackwater, and hearing tales of bandits and political intrigue. He drew up lists of repairs needed, promising that upon his return, he would dispatch funds and labor. When they finally crossed the Dornish marches into the sun-scorched reaches of Dorne, Tyrion felt a different heat, not only of the sun, but of history's iron grip. Orange groves lined narrow streams, and squat towers of red sandstone rose against the distant mountains. He rode into Saltshore first, greeting the local Castellan with courtesy, and inspecting the docks where smugglers once slipped past the Crown's levies. He negotiated a permanent customs house, staffed by Dornish officials trained at Casterly Rock, ensuring that revenues stayed in sovereign coffers. From Saltshore, they pressed inland to Starfall, House Dane's ancestral seat. There, Tyrion sought out Sir Arthur Dayne's aged steward, who recounted legends of the Sword of the Morning and the ancient pact between Danes and Martells. Tyrion listened respectfully, opening a chest to produce a pair of finely wrought Arrak blades forged by Lannister smiths. A gift of honor for Sir Daemon Dayne, who had recently come of age. "Let these swords remind you that our houses stand together," Tyrion said, sheathing one and handing the other with a solemn bow. The journey continued through the Boneway, where the heat and wind seemed determined to keep strangers at bay, until the spires of Sunspear rose like the prongs of a sleeping beast. The gates of the Water Garden stood open in greeting, an unprecedented welcome for a Lannister. And the ambassadors of the Martell Court and High Spicer offered cool wine and honeyed dates. Tyrion presented his father's letter beneath the long colonnades, where water lilies floated in shaded pools. He spoke at length before Prince Doran, formally but with gentle humor, reminding the Dornish prince of past alliances and the shared blood spilled under Targaryen banners. He acknowledged the pain of grievances unaddressed, then laid out his plans. Wells to be deepened, orchards to be planted in exchange for olive traders from Sunspear, and Lannister engineers to shore up threatened watchtowers along the Boneway. Prince Doran's eyes flicked with interest. "Your offers are generous, Lord Tyrion," he said. "But generosity must be matched by certainty. What guarantee does House Lannister provide that these works will be completed?" Then Tyrion produced a second letter, this one from Casterly Rock's Master of Coin, guaranteeing a fund of 50,000 gold dragons, deposited in the name of the Martell Treasury, to be drawn down as each project was finished and inspected by joint Dornish-Lannister overseers. "My lord," Tyrion said, "I stake the wealth of my birthright on this promise." A hush fell. At last, Prince Doran nodded. "So it shall be written, and so it shall be done." He smiled, a slow curve of lips that radiated both warmth and cunning. "Welcome to Dorne, Lord Lannister." In the days that followed, Tyrion toured the length of Dorne's southern reaches, witnessing the fierce loyalty of Dornish riders, the elegance of water gardens that defied the desert, and the stoicism of women who ruled as regents in their husbands' absences. He dispatched scouts to negotiate caravan routes northward, and dispatched letters to Sunspear's castellans ordering repairs to bridges and roads. He even dined with the sand snakes beneath open skies, sharing tales of Westerland's hunts, in exchange for stories of desert combat and guerrilla tactics. By the time he set out for King's Landing once more, his escort had grown to 300 strong, enriched by Dornish and Westerland levies alike. Along the roads, peasants hailed his banner, cheering the progress work parties repairing wells and planting citrus orchards. Tyrion laughed as he remembered the chapel at Casterly Rock, where his mother had taught him mercy. Here, in the heart of desert, mercy blossomed in every grove and spring. When he re-entered the city, dust-streaked and sun-browned, he found the small council awaiting him. The Hand, pleased, had already reported his successes. The Queen, Cersei, greeted him with a rare embrace. Even King Robert, when informed, remarked upon the novelty of the dwarf who brought water to the desert. The next weeks in the capital were a swirl of proposals. He urged the crown to formalize the Riverlands' defenses, to grant small councils for the North and Vale similar autonomy to the Dornish arrangement, and to invite representatives of merchant guilds into the king's court. He drafted laws to standardize tolls, to curtail corruption among quartermasters, and to encourage intermarriage among houses to strengthen unity. By the time the second harvest moon rose, Tyrion felt the weight of 7 kingdoms shifting beneath his pens. His proposals were heavy on compromise, light on tyranny, a reflection of his belief that a realm bound by shared prosperity would last longer than one held fast by fear. One evening, late and weary, he found Lady Sansa waiting in the gallery overlooking the Bay of Blackwater. Lanterns shone across the water, where moonlight danced on gentle waves. She greeted him with a warm smile. "It seems you have remade Dorne in a few months," she said softly. "What will you reshape next?" He joined her at the balustrade. The idea of Westeros itself, that our differences can be the threads of a grand tapestry, not the cuts of a blade. He tapped the carved lion rampant at his belt. "But the fabric is still fragile, and there are tears to mend." Sansa placed a hand on his arm. "You have a gift, Tyrion. A rare gift." He looked at her, gratitude softening his features. "And I have learned that power without purpose is a hollow crown. I intend to weave purpose into every golden link." They stood in silence, the sea breeze tangling their cloaks. Around them, the Red Keep hummed with the rattle of duty and the whisper of schemes. Tyrion inhaled deeply, feeling the promise of autumn in the air. The coming months would bring trials, Stark rebellions, rumors of Targaryen fleets, whispers in the shadows. But he knew himself ready. At last, he turned to descend the spiral stair. Each step carried him deeper into the heart of rule, where every word, every contract, every gift shaped the destiny of millions. At the threshold of power and mercy, Tyrion Lannister strode forward, determined to prove that a lion with a Dew's heart could change a realm. And in that steadfast resolve, the true legacy of Casterly Rock was being forged. One act of compassion, one alliance, one law at a time. I can certainly continue Tyrion's journey, given the length, It'll make sense to break the next 6,500-word segment into several self-contained acts, so you get a coherent narrative rather than a single wall of text. Here's a proposed outline for the next 6,500 words. Act I. Shadows in the North, 1,300 words. Tyrion receives word of unrest among the northern lords. He travels north with emissaries, navigating stark landscapes and Frostfang passes, forging a fragile alliance with Sansa and Jon to secure supply lines and rebuild the realm's unity. Act II. Dragons over the Narrow Sea, 1,300 words. Rumors of Daenerys dragons stir fear. Tyrion departs King's Landing for Pentos, then sails into the Bay of Dragons to parley with the exiled queen, negotiating peace or war as visions of fire and blood loom. Act III. Intrigue at the Red Keep, 1,300 words. Back in King's Landing, Tyrion uncovers a plot by court rivals. A web of spies and poison threatens the small council. He must outwit both friends and foes, using wit and occasional steel to keep the realm from tearing itself apart. Act IV. The Ironborn Rising, 1,300 words. News comes of an Ironborn fleet ravaging the western coasts. Tyrion marshals Lannister's ships, coordinates with the Arbor and the Reach, and leads a daring naval engagement to protect his people. Act V. The Lion's Shadow, 1,300 words. As all fronts light up, north, sea, and court, Tyrion must confront the greatest challenge, reconciling his obligations to House Lannister with his vision for a just realm. He faces a personal crucible that will define his legacy. Let me know if this structure works for you, and I'll begin with Act I. Tyrion rose before dawn once more, the pale light slipping through narrow windows as he dressed in travel leathers of dark green and gold. A chill wind whispered through the corridors of the Red Keep, an illumined herald of the journey that awaited him. His father's raven had brought word of unrest in the north, bannermen chafing under levees to guard the King's Road, rumors of raiders along the Wolf's Den, and even whispers of an insurgent lord claiming old Stark titles. The realm's fragile unity trembled on the edge of fracture, and Tyrion knew that if he delayed, the flames of rebellion would grow beyond any hope of gentle quelling. He found Sir Kevan in the council chamber, studying maps by candlelight. "We ride at first light," Tyrion announced. Kevan looked up, fatigue shadowing his stern features. "The passes through the Fingers and the Gap are treacherous this time of year. Snow and rockslides slow travel, and bandits prey on lone riders." Tyrion nodded. "Then we travel with company enough to scatter both snow and brigands. Send word to Sansa Stark. I go north not as conqueror, but as mediator. Her voice will lend weight to my words." Kevan bowed and turned to preparations. They set out 2 days later, a column of 30 knights and 50 light cavalry, their banners muted for travel. The road north climbed through the Crownlands into the Mountains of the Moon, where winter lingered long past its feast. Tyrion endured the bitter wind as horses' breath steamed white in the gloom. At each holdfast, he dismounted to speak with castle captains, listening to complaints of overtaxed farmers and grieving widows whose husbands guarded the wall. He offered relief, grain from Lannisport, extra coin, and promised that their burdens would ease once the road was secure. On the third evening, as they approached the forks of the Wolf's Den, a scouting party returned, breathless and alarmed. "Lord Serwyn's men have taken control of the crossroads," the lead scout reported. "They demand the Crown's garrison withdraw or face battle." Tyrion frowned. "Lord Serwyn owes fealty to the king and duty to his liege lord, Lady Sansa. Send a message. Speak only to me and my Stark envoy. Any harm to our knights, and I will answer to Casterly Rock myself." The scout bowed and galloped off. That night, beneath a sky thick with clouds, Tyrion lay awake on his cloak, counting the soft drip of melting snow. He thought of the north, its solemn beauty, its harsh justice, the loyalty that sprang from shared hardship rather than gold. He wondered if his southern heart would ever truly understand a land ruled by honor and axe, rather than coin and quill. Dawn found them at the crossroads, where Lord Serwyn himself awaited. A broad-shouldered man wrapped in wolf fur cloak, steel helm under one arm. At his side stood Lady Sansa, taller now than any remembered, hair the auburn of autumn leaves. Tyrion dismounted, offering a bow. Serwyn's eyes were hard, but Sansa smiled, an echo of their days in King's Landing, when they pored over maps in candlelit halls. "My lord," Sansa greeted. "Thank you for coming." She stepped forward to address her bannerman. "Ser Ryan Serwyn, this is Lord Tyrion of House Lannister, heir to Casterly Rock and Hand's envoy. He comes in peace." Serwyn spat on the frozen earth. "Words, Lady Stark. And I guard my lands and people from thieves in gold lace." Sansa's gaze was cool. "Then you will stand down until he hears your grievances." Tyrion inclined his head. "My lord Serwyn." "Show me your concerns. We will address them together before any blood is shed." In the tented courtyard, Serwyn spoke of forced levies sent south, of the road's devastation by passing armies, of families left to starve. Tyrion listened, silent as the wind rattled the canvas, then laid out a plan. His escort would guard the passes for 6 weeks, using scouts to root out raiders. The crown would remit half the arrears owed by each smallhold for 2 harvests. A fund from the Westerlands would finance repairs to weather-torn roads. In return, Serwyn's levies would stand down and integrate under Stark command. He placed parchment signed with both Stark and Lannister seals on the rough table. Serwyn eyed the document, then Sansa, then Tyrion. At last he nodded, stiffly placing his sword on the table and dipping his helm in a curt bow. Sansa's expression softened. Tyrion allowed himself a small private smile. With the crossroad secured, they rode north to Winterfell itself, the old stronghold looming gray against frostbitten fields. The Godswood's weirwood tree stood silent sentinel as Sansa led Tyrion past the gates. Robins and jays darted among bare branches. Their pale feathers glimmered like hope in the cold. In the great hall, lords and ladies of the north, Manderless, Mormonts, Glover, Umber, assembled in wary silence. Tyrion stood beside Sansa at the dais, his cloak buttoned high against the chill. He spoke plainly. "The realm stands on the brink. If the North fractures now, no army can reunite it. I ask your fealty not to House Lannister, but to the realm itself, and to the Stark name that has guided you through long winters." He spoke of trade, iron from the Vale for Lannisport's grain, furs for Westerlander cloth, and of common defense against the free folk, and any dragon wing that might darken their skies. He did not hide the cost. The levies would answer the king's summons, and their lords would dispatch men to fight in distant wars. But in return, he offered a council in Winterfell. 2 northern knights, 2 Westerlanders, and a Stark. A small court that would adjudicate border disputes without dispatch to King's Landing. A murmur ran through the hall. Some lords nodded, others scowled. Sansa's voice, calm and firm, rang out. "I stand with Lord Tyrion's vision, and I will uphold its promises." At her side, Robb Stark's envoy, a young knight with stark gray eyes, took up the pledge, and one by one the lords laid aside their swords and signed. When the last seal dried, the hall exhaled relief like a gust of mountain wind. Ale was poured in horned cups, and the assembled rose in toasts to unity and peace. Tyrion felt the weight of his crosses lighten, his mother's memory lifting his spirits. Even in icebound lands, kindness could thaw suspicion. That night, beneath Pax sky, he wrote letters to his captains. "Leave garrisons under Stark command for now, but maintain watch on the passes. Send reports of any Lord Frey or Lannister troops moving through the neck, and send word to King's Landing that the North stood united once more." He sealed them by candlelight, his pen gliding as easily over vellum as his mind ran through plans for the next front. The dragons across the sea, the Ironborn stirring off the western coast, and the ever-present intrigue in the marble halls of the capital. When at last he lay down, the wind outside carried a promise. A promise that the North would endure, that the realm might hold, and that a small man born to privilege could bind even the hardest hearts with deeds born of compassion, and a will as unyielding as Casterly Rock itself. And so, with the dawn that crept through Winterfell's narrow windows, Tyrion Lannister prepared for the trials yet to come, his resolve as bright and unbreakable as Valyrian steel. A. Tyrion left Winterfell's snow-dusted walls with the first breath of thaw, his heart heavy with the farewell to Sansa and the North, yet buoyed by the success of their accord. His party numbered only 50 riders, swift scouts and trusted knights, bearing messages for King's Landing and letters to the Lords of the Vale, the Reach, and the Iron Islands. Supplies were light, speed was paramount. Beyond, across the narrow sea, lay the city of Pentos, gateway to the east, and the exiled Targaryen queen whose dragons, if the rumors proved true, might rend the very skies of Westeros. They crossed the Shadowlands and reached King's Landing under a slate-gray sky. Tyrion paused only long enough to dispatch ravens and refresh his cloak before boarding the galley Lion's prow. 5 days and starless nights at sea carried them to Pentos' brackish harbor, where lanterns bobbed like fireflies along wooden piers. The salty wind carried the tang of spices, cardamom, saffron, dried chilies, and the calls of distant merchant vessels in a cacophony foreign yet intoxicating. Pentos' governor, Illyrio Mopatis, received Tyrion with opulence. Silken carpets, trays of candied fruits, and cups of arbor gold. "Welcome again to my halls, Lord Tyrion," Illyrio intoned, beaming as though his smile could warp iron. "You come with news of the North? And perhaps with proposals for that troublesome girl in Meereen?" Tyrion inclined his head. "I come with an offer and a warning. The realm bends toward chaos unless we act swiftly." "No." In the great pavilion overlooking the harbor, they spoke of trade caravans that once linked Westeros to Korth, of traders who paid silver for Lacine wines and Taroshi silks, and of the necessity to reopen those routes once the threat of dragonborn war had passed. Illyrio offered ships, provisions, and mercenary guards for Tyrion's safe passage to Vise Dothrak or the free cities beyond. But Tyrion's purpose lay east of Pentos, across storm-tossed seas and burning sands. 2 days later, aboard Lion's prow again, they sailed southward, skirting the false coastline of Slaver's Bay. The water grew warmer, green gold beneath the sun, and the sails became a flutter of color against endless sky. On the third dawn, smoke and ash darkened the horizon. Tyrion's heart beat faster as they approached the jagged ruins of Meereen. Once proud slaver city, now ringed with the remnants of walls scarred by dragonfire. Anchoring west of the harbor, they sent a small skiff ashore under a white flag of parley. Rumors held that Daenerys Targaryen still commanded loyalists among the freedmen, that her dragons, at least 2, still circled the skies. Tyrion's tongue felt too dry for talk. He remembered his mother's counsel in times of crisis. Words are the flax from which we spin chains or weave cloaks. He would choose his carefully. They were led through crumbling gates into a throne room of broken pillars and sand-swept mosaics. From the shadows emerged a figure clad in dragon-scale leather, bronze rings heavy in her hair, her eyes the violet of twilight. 2 great beasts, one ivory white, scales glinting, the other speckled bronze, curled about her on carved dais. Their breaths were smoke, their claws left gouges in the stone. Tyrion's breath caught, but he bowed. "Princess Daenerys," he began, voice steady, "I come as envoy of King's Landing, as heir to Casterly Rock, and as servant of the realm that birthed you, though it cast you out." The dragons hissed low. She raised a hand, and they nudged forward but did not attack. Daenerys' gaze held him. "I will hear you," she said. Her voice carried the timbre of command and the promise of wildfire. Tyrion unfolded his proposal. "Cease your raids on the narrow sea in exchange for formal recognition of your claim to the 7 kingdoms. To sit as queen in King's Landing alongside the king, under terms that guaranteed the rights of freedmen and small folk. In return, he offered to secure the loyalty of the Westerlands, the Reach, and the North, and to deliver Tywin Lannister's armies to aid in your wars on the slaver cities of Essos." A murmur rose among the guards. The dragons shifted uneasily. Daenerys studied him in silence, At last, she rose, eyes narrowed, not with ire but with calculation. You ask me to yield my freedom for promises made by those who once betrayed my family. She walked down the dais, sandals stirring dust. But I seen what power brings. Men bow before dragons until they burn upon the throne itself. Why should I trust a Lannister's word? Tyrion lifted his chin. Because I have offered every ounce of my house's gold and every legion in our name. Because I will stand beside you in the great halls and ride at your side in battle. And because, should you choose to reject the peace I offer, you will stand alone when Tyrion Lannister's armies come at your back. The last words hovered like steel. He had threatened her, but not in anger, in truth. Daenerys held his gaze, then turned her back to the city's ruin. Smoke billowed from a distant tower. Bells clanged. She traced a fingertip in the dust. Perhaps, she murmured. You have more courage than most courtiers. She swept her hand outward. I will consider your terms. But know this, if you cross me, no gold nor steel will save House Lannister. Then, and shall. Tyrion bowed again, bowels tight. He withdrew under the watchful eyes of Dragon and Queen, his mind racing with what alliances or wars might spring from this fragile truce. Back on the Lion's prow, waves lapped against the hull, and the horizon burned orange with the dying light. He allowed himself a single thought. If one man could sway the mother of dragons, perhaps an entire kingdom could be remade. Their return passage was less tranquil. Storms lashed Penton sand into the sea, and rumors rode the wind. Ironborn longships had been sighted skirting the western coasts, raiding fishing villages and ferrying pirates to Casterly Rock's shores. Tyrion resolved that upon his return to King's Landing, he would marshal a fleet to intercept them, an alliance of Lannisport's captains, Arbor's wine fleets, and the Tyrell merchant convoys. They reached the capital on a morning of slate-gray stillness. Before even disembarking, Tyrion dispatched ravens eastward with Daenerys' tentative reply. Within hours, he convened the small council in the eastern solar, where maps of the narrow sea lay strewn across a table. Cersei watched with thinly veiled disdain, while Lord Varys' spiders slipped in and out like smoke. Tywin listened as Tyrion outlined both his successful mission and the necessity of a naval alliance. We cannot ignore the threat on our own shores, nor the one across the sea. One requires ships and steel, the other requires words, and the promise of gold and blood. Now, over the following days, orders went forth. Shipwrights in Lannisport to ready 20 galleys, grain from Highgarden to provision crews, and envoys to the Arbor to ensure the support of its fleet. Meanwhile, couriers bore Tyrion's formal treaty offer to Meereen and the Free City's merchant princes, inviting them to reopen the ports of Westeros once the dragons lay down their wings or joined as allies. As summer's sun rose high and the city stank of sewage and heat, Tyrion turned his gaze inward. Rumors of plots in the Red Keep, of secret alliances between Tyrell and Martell, of whispers that Cersei would strike first. In the corridors, poison flowed more freely than wine. Daggers hid behind smiles. Tyrion knew that to protect the realm he envisioned, to bind north, south, east, and west in a web of mutual benefit, he would have to play the deadly game of intrigue, where betrayal came on velvet wings and trust was the rarest treasure of all. And so, beneath the banners of the Lion and the Black Dragon, amidst the clash of dragonfire and the clamor of hammer on deck, Tyrion Lannister prepared for the next great move in the Game of Thrones, one that would test not only his deft mind, but the very heart of the realm he strove to unite. Tyrion's return to the Red Keep came under a heavy sky, the weight of unspoken schemes seeming to press upon its marble walls. Torches flared along the corridors as he passed. Servants dipped their heads. Courtiers curtsied and whispered, and behind every silken curtain lurked eyes that measured his every step. He found the small council assembled in the Hand's Tower. His father seated at the head, Cersei to his right, Varys gliding at the back like a dark shadow, and Pycelle perched stiffly beside the map-laden table. "Report," Lord Tywin commanded, his voice as cold and unforgiving as steel. Tyrion sank into his chair and unfolded the letters from Meereen and Pentos. Daenerys Targaryen delays her answer. Though her envoy in Pentos confirms she did not reject our offer outright. She weighs the loss of freedom against the chance to sit the Iron Throne under terms that protect the small folk. He paused, letting the council digest the gravity of plying peace with the dragon. Meanwhile, the Ironborn have struck again at Fair Isle. I recommend dispatching the Lannisport galleys at once, in concert with the Arbor Fleet, to intercept them before they ravage more coastal towns. Cersei's lip curled. Why chase raiders when traitors sit at our very table? She nodded toward Varys. Rumor has it separate alliances are being brokered behind the hand's back, and poison has been found in Lady Tanda's cup. And small council cups are shared by all. Tywin's hand clenched. Is this true? He barked. Varys stepped forward, voice low. I cannot yet name names, my lord, but my little birds report clandestine meetings at odd hours, oaths sworn in blood, and promises of support to a new candidate for the throne should the royal family falter. He produced a scrap of paper. Just a ciphered excerpt. Intercepted correspondence, bearing the seals of both Tyrell and Martell. A murmur ran through the room. Pycelle gasped. Cersei's eyes flashed with triumph. Tyrion tapped his fingers against the vellum, calculating. We must unmask these conspirators quickly, and publicly, if possible. Let them know that plotting in the Red Keep invites ruin, not reward. He turned to Varys. Spider, trace the ink, identify the courier routes, and let your children listen close. I want every whisper caught. Varys inclined his head, disappearing like smoke. Tyrion leaned toward his sister. Keep your allies close, Cersei, and your enemies in your view. I will need your support to do this without igniting civil war. Cersei's smile was thin. I will drink the wine you give me, little brother. So long as I know where the cup is spiked. Over the next days, Tyrion wove a web of inquiries. He spent mornings in the kitchens, sampling meat pies and ale, watching for the slightest suspicion in the faces of steward and cook alike. At midday he visited the rookery, disguising his interest in the ravens to comb through orders for dispatch, using the letters as bait to flush out those who might intercept them. Evenings found him in smoky taverns beneath the city, leaning into the laughter of sailors and dockhands to learn of any ships slipping north with dubious cargo. All the while, he cultivated an appearance of calm, of confidence in the peace he brokered abroad, so that no one suspected the tempest brewing in the castle itself. One night, as a cold wind rattled the shutters of his chamber, a soft rap came at the door. Pursing his lips, Tyrion opened it to find Podrick Payne, the young squire, his face pale with urgency. My lord, Podrick whispered, extending a sealed letter. I intercepted this on the way here. It was meant for Lord Tyrell's man in the Water Gardens. Tyrion broke the seal by candlelight. The letter, written in a careful hand, spoke of the hand's weakness and promised that, when the Tyrell host raises its banners at dawn, the Lannister lion will be torn from its rock. The final line chilled him. The Queen awaits only the signal, then will strike. Podrick's voice trembled. I did not know where else to bring it. Tyrion folded the parchment, eyes alight. Good work. He tucked the letter into his tunic, then sent Podrick away. Alone, he ground his teeth, mind racing. The Queen, his own sister, might be implicated, but he knew Cersei would never march an army against her father's command unless forced. The true danger lay in Margaery or Olenna scheming to wrest power, while the Lannister name lay bloody. At dawn, Tyrion strode into the council chamber, letter in hand. The small council gathered, Varys seated at the back, Pycelle coughing, Cersei biting a blood-red rose petal. My lords, Tyrion began, voice firm. I bring evidence of a conspiracy so deep it reaches into the heart of this court. He read aloud the letter, watching faces blanch. At the mention of banners raised at dawn, Mace Tyrell's robust frame tensed. Olenna Tyrell's eyes narrowed to slits. Lord Mace, Tywin's thunderous voice summoned him. The Tyrell patriarch rose, face pale. This is treasonous slander, brought by a dwarf hungry for rumor. Tyrion met his gaze. The paper bears your seal, and word of riders sworn to Martell's vengeance. If you doubt me, search my chambers, question my servants, deny the contents, but do not deny the handwriting." He tossed the letter onto the table. Silence now would be complicity. A drumbeat of hoofs interrupted the tension. The gates of the Red Keep clanged open, and in the courtyard, banners of House Tyrell and House Martell fluttered alongside Lannister pennons. Outside, knights in green and gold joined Dornish spearmen, forming ranks for parade rather than battle. Cersei's lips parted in a silent exclamation. Mace Tyrell's hand strayed to the pommel of his sword. Tywin rose at last. "Enough," he said. "Let us see where these banners ride." In the courtyard, Margaery Tyrell and Prince Doran Martell stood astride their horses, surrounded by their guards. At their heels rode Carla Sand and the Lady Olenna's own retainers. A hush fell as Tyrion entered, torchlight dancing off steel. Cersei went forward, voice cold. "What is this spectacle, Lady Tyrell? Dare you threaten the authority of Casterly Rock and its hand with foreign banners in the king's city?" "Many." Margaery fixed her with sweet contempt. "We came to commemorate the accord between House Martell and House Tyrell, an alliance forged in fire and blood, as you so love to remind the realm. We did not expect the hand to suspect us of treason." Hoarse laughter rippled through the court. Tyrion stepped between them. "You ride here under letters of safe conduct," he said evenly. "At my bidding. Banners that once flew for war now ride as a display of unity. Any who misconstrue this for threat will answer to the king himself." "Then shall." Prince Doran's gaze met his. "Perhaps you should read the letters passed between our houses more closely, Lord Tyrion, before crying treason. Our only interest is the safety of Dorne, and the prosperity of all lands under sunlight and salt." At his words, Lannister guards advanced a step, and Tywin's cold voice thundered, "Return to your pavilions. The celebration of peace resumes now." Mace Tyrell bowed, eyes flicking to his mother, who gave a subtle nod. The banners shifted, aligning behind their lords, not as a hostile host, but as a pageant of power. Lords and ladies from across the realm, united under a display of pomp. That evening, a feast blazed in the great hall. Minstrels struck lutes, dancers whirled, and goblets of arbored gold passed freely. Tyrion sat at the high table, between his father and Varys, watching the players on this deadly stage. Across the hall, Margaery laughed with Oberyn Martell's envoy. Olenna sipped her wine and warned Cersei in a low voice. Everywhere, alliances danced and shifted like candlelight. At last Tyrion rose, tapping his goblet. To peace forged in adversity, and to the wisdom to see enemies as allies. If only for a single night. His toast echoed, and the hall raised their cups. He caught Cersei's eye and offered a small, knowing smile. She returned it, an acknowledgement that this ruse had worked. They had unmasked schemers without bloodshed, bound Tyrell and Martell to the Lannister cause, and sent them away chastened. As the candles guttered and the revelry waned, Tyrion slipped from the hall to the ramparts of the Rose Tower. There, under stars rough and clear, he found Varys leaning on the battlements, peering into the dark. "Well met, Spider," Tyrion said. Varys spread his arms. "The stage is set, Lord Tyrion. The players know their roles now. The Tyrells will think twice before plotting. Prince Doran will weigh every word." He produced a folded paper. "From Merain, Daenerys agrees to parley in Pentos. She wishes assurances of her personal safety and a guarantee that no blue cloak will seize her for execution." Tyrion took the missive, the words sparking in his mind. "A new move in the great game. Then we sail again. This time with more persuasion." Varys's voice was soft. "May the gods grant you favor." Tyrion gazed at the Black Sea beyond the walls, imagining dragonflight across its depths, ironborn sails on its surface, and dozens of plots bubbling in hidden chambers. He drew a deep breath, steeling himself. To unite the Seven Kingdoms, he would need courage beyond cunning, mercy beyond politics, and resolve as unbreakable as Valyrian steel. He tucked the letter into his breast and whispered to the night, "Let the next move be mine." And with that, the hand of the king turned back toward the shifting corridors of power. ready to shape the destiny of a realm on the brink of either unity or ruin. Oh. Tyrion Lannister stood at the prow of the Lion's Prow as dawn's first light gilded the narrow sea. The air was sharp with salt and promise, and the deck thrummed with sailors hauling lines and trimming sails. Beneath him, the waves darkened as the ship cut a path toward Pentos, where Daenerys Targaryen had agreed to parley once more. Behind him lay King's Landing, its marble towers teeming with schemes, while ahead lay the buzzards of destiny, circling above broken cities and unbroken hearts. He wore light mail beneath his traveling cloak, and a slender sword hung at his hip, not for parade but in readiness. He had insisted on accompanying the envoy himself. Any slight to his person could be answered with force, and Daenerys must know he risked his life as readily as he offered his hand. The memory of Dragonfire-scarred stone and Meereen still burned in his mind, and he had refined his terms. Recognition of her claim in exchange for reconciliation with the realm, sanctuary and infrastructure for freedmen, and a swear by Dragonfire that no soldier or spymaster would seize her under Blue Cloak's authority. Below deck he found Podrick Payne stowing scrolls. "They say the princess will ride north with us this time," Podrick reported, voice low. "She sends 3 of her dragons to guide the fleet." Tyrion nodded. "Then we must bring the crown's colors forward. Let every banner, Lannister red, Tyrell green, Martell orange, fly alongside the black dragon standard. Let the sea know we sail not to conquer, but to converge." "Benawan." A horn sounded, and the Lion's Prow slipped past Pentos lighthouse into its crescent harbor. Fleet captains rowed ashore to deliver his summons, and by midday an entourage of richly clad Pentoshi nobles and Corthine merchants pressed aboard to witness the approach. When he surfaced, he saw the city's pastel palaces lining the water's edge, and beyond them, the silver sails of Daenerys' 3 dragons hovering like living kites. He led his small party across the gangplank and into the grand pavilion where Illyrio Mopatis awaited, draped in purple and gold. "Your Grace," Illyrio greeted, feigning obeisance to Tyrion's rank as envoy. "The Mother of Dragons has risen from Meereen sands to receive you." Tyrion inclined his head. "I trust the princess does not endure, as I did, the indignities of too many ambassadors bearing empty words." He let the rebuke hang in the perfumed air. Illyrio smiled thinly and escorted him through marble corridors carved with the shapes of winged serpents. They entered an immense courtyard tiled in white and lapis, where a dais had been set. At its center rested the iron-bound chair stolen long ago from Pentos' founder. Above it, Daenerys appeared, taller than any minstrel's tale, bronze blood gleaming in her hair, violet eyes flickering like flame. Yet she did not sit. Instead, she stood forth, flanked by 3 riders in pale leather, Qarth's devoted knights, each bearing a dragon banner, ivory, bronze, and green. Behind them, the 3 dragons danced between sky and wing, their scales catching the sun in glints of molten metal. Tyrion bowed. "Princess Daenerys, I bring the Lannister lion, the Tyrell rose, and the Martell sun in their colors of peace. I ask you once more to hold your throne not by isolation, but through alliance. Your dragons shall no longer be weapons of fear, but wings of hope for the 7 kingdoms, and for all the world beneath their shadow." Daenerys surveyed the banners as though tasting their weight. "Your words grow daring, little lion." She said, her voice echoing in the marble hush. "I have heard promises like these before. What guarantee do I have that, once I choose to land in King's Landing, I will not find chains at my wrists and vipers' tongues in my ear?" "Bow." Tyrion offered a sealed scroll stamped with 3 seals. "This is the seal of the realm, the joint accord signed by Lord Tywin, Queen Cersei, Lord Mace Tyrell, and Prince Doran Martell. It promises you safe conduct, a joint council at King's Landing in which you will hold equal voice and protections for all freedmen. We swear by iron and gold, and you may swear by Dragonflame upon us." Daenerys took the scroll, fingertips brushing his. "And should the Lannisters break their word?" Her gaze sharpened. "Should your counsel betray me when I stand beneath the throne?" Tyrion's eyes met hers. Think of those who labored in your name, princess. Those freedmen whose lives hinge on the promise of rebuilding, of justice, of peace. If Lannisters breach this contract, every mine shaft and vineyard in the Westerlands will lie empty. I have put my house fortune and my life on the line. Do you place your faith in a Lannister's honor? She studied him, the desert winds stirring her robes. Behind her, the dragons let out low roars. A beat of silence passed. At length, she nodded and broke the scroll's seal, reading the terms in measured tones. Safe conduct, council votes, freedmen's protections, joint armies against slavers, and a vow that no suppressed throne would rise against her own. When she finished, she turned the parchment. Then it is done. She offered her hand, a cool affirmation of truce. Tyrion grasped it, the cavernous court echoing with the seal of their accord. Tyrion remained in Pentos long enough to oversee the redrawing of shipping charts, granting safe harbor to Pentoshi and Westerosi merchant fleets alike. He shared Hawks and Eagle's sight with Qartheen navigators, learning of new archipelagos beyond the Jade Gates. He arranged for Meereen's craftsmen to travel north and teach their arts in Old Town, and for merchants from Lys to open stalls in Lannisport's markets. Where once dragons had symbolized conquest, now they crowned ship prows, flanked by entwined lions, roses and suns, heralding a new era of commerce and camaraderie. At last, he embarked on the Lion's Prow for King's Landing. His hold heavy with letters of credit, treaties and letters, patent-granting trade monopolies to merchant houses that backed the accord. The return voyage was swift on a wind from the northwest, the dragon's wings scything clouds from the sky as though clearing the way for peace. They reached Blackwater Bay amid celebrations. Church bells pealed across the city, harbormen cheered, and Casterly Rock's minstrels played a new anthem, The Lion and the Dragon, on lutes and pipes. Tyrion disembarked and strode through cheering crowds, letting their jubilation cloak him as he returned to the Red Keep. Within the throne room, he presented Cersei and Tywin with the signed scrolls. The Iron Throne's jagged blades seemed to lean toward him in approval. Even Tywin, for all his unyielding pride, allowed a trace of satisfaction to crease his brow. You have done more than any hand in living memory, he acknowledged. Cersei kissed him on the cheek. The realm may yet remember you with something other than scorn, little brother. Tyrion inclined his head. He had forged dragons into allies and ambassadors into friends. Yet he knew darker trials lurked. The Ironborn still prowled the western coast, and pockets of rebellion festered among lords who suspected a dwarf's promises as easily broken as spun glass. Schemes still curled in the Red Keep's corridors like serpents, and beyond the narrow sea, other powers, assassins in Sothorios, merchants in Ashai, watched Westeros' transformation with wary eyes. But for this moment, he allowed himself a rare pleasure. The knowledge that he had steered the fate of kingdoms by wit, by courage, and by the odd humility of offering mercy where sword and fire had once reigned. He would need all his cunning for the storms to come, but he had shown that even the smallest man could cast the longest shadow, and that the roar of the lion could be heard in the gentlest whisper of a dragon's promise. Oh, ka. Oh, eh. The tide had hardly receded before word came of Ironborn longships prowling the southern coasts. Fishermen at Fair Isle claimed a fleet of 8 galleys had beached under cover of night, raiding villages and seizing grain stores before disappearing into the mist. Tyrion's first thought was of the small folk. Wives left to guard empty granaries, children crying for bread. He summoned his captains to the yard beneath the Rose Tower, where the cawing of ravens and the clatter of armor rose in mingled urgency. 4 galleys at Lannisport, ready to sail at dawn, reported Captain Ellen Starksail, her sea-soaked coat glinting in the torchlight. The Arbor fleet can spare 6, if Lord Tyrell sends word. Do it, Tyrion snapped. And dispatch another raven south to Prince Doran. Tell him the Dornish fleet must patrol the Boneway in concert with ours. No ship may strike without consequence. He turned to his steward. Provision the Lion's Prow for 3 months. Grain, salted beef, barrels of arbor gold, and a company of swordsmen. I sail for the western waters. Before dawn, the harbor thrummed with activity. Galley slaves strained at oars, hammermen on deck bent iron rings for freed boats, and the shore sparkled with steel as knights in gold and red prepared to embark. Tyrion stood on the Lion's Prow's forecastle, the spray lashing his cloak, and watched the banners of Lannister, Tyrell and Martell flap like war kites against the morning sky. He nodded once sharply, and the signal was given. They swept out of Blackwater Bay like a hunting pack. The ironborn vessels lay hidden in the lee of the Golden Tooth Peninsula, sentinels asleep at their hewn rock bays. Tyrion's fleet fanned in a crescent, galleys wheeling into position as oars dipped in unison. He knew the ironborn prized surprise, lifting the sea's darkest shadows to cloak their raids. But here, lured into battle by the promise of unguarded prey, they would taste the combined might of three great houses. When the first hornblower of House Hightide sounded his call, arrows arced through the salt air like deadly tides. Ironborn shields splintered under volleys of crossbow bolts from the Lannister bows, and the longships reeled. Tyrion stood at the rail of his flagship, sword in one hand, trumpet in the other, and raised the lion's call, a single note that echoed like thunder across the waves. "Board them," he roared. Deck to deck. The clash was brutal. The hiss of boarding hooks, the groan of timber ripped free, the ring of steel, and the howl of the dying. Tyrion leapt ashore on the enemy's flagship, closing with the ironborn captain, a scarred giant whose sword swung like an axe. Tyrion ducked under a wild blow, stabbing upward through a slit in the helm. The giant fell with a roar, and Tyrion seized the forked banner of House Goodbrother, ripping it down and stamping it beneath his boot. Behind him, the Arbor's swift boats cut off ironborn escape, and Tyrell archers loosed their longbows from the shore. Within hours, 6 longships lay wrecked, their hulls aflame, and 2 more surrendered under a black sail. Tyrion's men cheered, but he signaled restraint. "Spare them," he ordered. "Bind their hands and leave their captains to me." He turned to see the charred skyline of a coastal village rising beyond the rocks. Smoke curling from burned roofs and scorched fields. His heart ached for those who would come at dawn to find their homes gutted. He drew his cloak tighter. "Send aid," he commanded. "Build them new huts, send grain, and allow their sons to serve in our fleet. Let their scars be a reminder that the sea should bind us, not destroy us." The captain staggered with relief. Tyrion's mercy, like a balm on ragged wounds, settled the fleet's nerves. They fought not only for gold and glory but for the safety of shores they loved. By midday, the surviving ironborn were sent back to their crannogs under truce, their ships impounded as reparations. Tyrion watched them row away, faces blank with fear and awe, and he allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Before nightfall, relief caravans rumbled south with carts of building timber and casks of fresh water. Farmers and fishermen, seeing the royal fleet not as a distant court but as deliverers, came forward to accept aid with reverent tears. Tyrion smiled as he walked among them, handing out coins, sharing words of comfort, and promising that Casterly Rock's lion would guard their hearths as vigilantly as any father. He returned to King's Landing the next week under a sky of copper sunset. In the Great Hall, he found a gathering of the small council and the newly arrived ambassadors from Meereen, ex-slaves turned guildmasters. Their robes plain, but their presence a potent symbol of change. They bore gifts of ivory and draperies of rich weave, tribute for the realm that had honored their freedom. Cersei's gaze was unreadable as they presented their thanks. Tywin's nod was curt approval. Varys glided among them, his whispering spies ensuring no slight went unnoticed. Tyrion stood at the dais, arms crossed, savoring the moment. East and west woven together, the Ironborn humbled, the North aligned, and the dragon's due still pending but now framed in purpose rather than fear. Yet beneath the veneer of progress lay darker currents. In the corridors he sensed new conspiracies. The Shadow Tower's maesters whispering of obscure prophecies, Dornish envoys passing coded notes to Blackwater couriers, and a clutch of lords from the Riverlands murmuring of a true heir. to challenge the Targaryens and the Baratheons alike. One night, as he sat at his desk drafting laws to regulate the free folk's rights, a servant slipped a parchment under the door, the seal of the Brotherhood without banners. The note inside bore a single line: "Just because you can unite houses does not mean you can unite hearts. Watch the river of blood you think you stem." Bam! Tyrion stared at the words, tasting their threat like poison. He burned the letter in his brazier, but the smoke curled in mocking spirals. Mercy and alliance had carried him far, but ambition's price was ever suspicion, and every act of compassion invited darker deeds in return. He closed his eyes and inhaled the mingled scents of ink, wax, and burning paper. In that charged stillness, he resolved to confront these shadows as boldly as he had faced ironborn warlords and Dragon Queen's demands. The next dawn, he would ride for Oldstones, where the river lords were gathering under the guise of trade talks. He would unmask their designs or bind them anew in service to the realm. Because a realm bound by treaties was only as strong as the trust behind them, and Tyrion Lannister, heir to Casterly Rock and Hand of the King, would dare anything to forge that trust from steel gold and the stubborn compassion of a lion's heart.